Taking no responsibility. Right, I've done as you have requested.
Okay, you're recording to the cloud. All right,
Yeah.
yes. And then when we close it, it'll make a link and you won't have to do anything more.
Okay.
Technology.
And it is showing that you're recording. It's come up in the corner.
Yeah.
Ooh, right.
Yeah.
Okay, be good, everybody.
Could be a little bad.
You give the impression, Emma, you think we wouldn't be good.
I've been on these meetings before. Just saying. Right. Okay, well, this has exceeded my expectations. Okay, so welcome, ladies. We're at 32 minutes past, so I will introduce you to, this evening I'm very excited, we've got Liz Fuller, who is Vice President of the Southport Historical Society of North Carolina, and also a very brave Bob Surridge, who is President of the Southport Historical Society, North Carolina. I'm sure you enjoy being surrounded by this many females. So they are going to give us a talk on the history of Southport, North Carolina. So it is over to you.
All right, so let's see. I'm going to share my screen. And hopefully this will work.
Let me note before we get started that we realize that what we're presenting in history is really nothing more than current events for you folks.
Yes. Well, didn't want to say.
Okay, now, do you see my slides and not my speaker notes?
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what we want.
Do you need to mute us all, Emma?
Oh,
do you want them muted?
Yes, please.
Yes.
Okay. Oh, you have to, we have to unmute me.
I haven't muted you.
Oh, you're just muting everybody else. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, great. If you do, feel free to interrupt me. If you have any questions, just take yourself off mute. And then when you're done, put it back on mute. Don't worry about having to save it to the end. Or I assume you can put it into chat and ask questions that way. So, good evening, everyone. I'm Liz Fuller from the Southport, North Carolina Historical Society, and Bob Surridge and I are excited to speak with you today to tell you about our town and about our society. So thank you so much for inviting us, and thank you to the person who put this wonderful flyer together that I included on the slide. I really liked it, and it shows the similarities of our two towns. So, and it came up with a great name for the presentation, A Meeting of Two Southports, which I took from the slide and I really liked it. So, all right, I'm sure you've all heard the expression that a picture is worth 1,000 words. So before we talk to you about the history of our town, we wanted to show you some photos of it so you can begin to understand why we think it's such a special place. So as I introduce our society, I'm just going to scroll through some pictures of our town so you can get a feel of what it would be like to visit us. And please stop me if you have any questions about any of these photos. So our historical society was formed 44 years ago in 1976, which was also the 200th anniversary of the United States. So a sense of history was in the air. And two Southport women who were friends and neighbors got together and decided that our town's history was worth preserving and sharing. And we're glad they did, because since that start, the society has grown to over 330 members, and we've written and published over 20 books of local history. We provide annual scholarships for local high school students, and we put on fun and educational programs such as our annual Christmas home tour and our Halloween Living Voices of the Past celebration, when Southport historical characters come to life in our burying ground to tell about their lives and times. Since the COVID pandemic earlier this year, the Society has increased our focus on online communication. Since April, we have presented over 50 online programs involving over 30 presenters from our community. And we have grown our Facebook page to over 3,000 subscribers. We were pretty excited when our reach extended to far-off states like New Jersey and Texas. But today's presentation is our first international program, and we are very excited to be sharing it with you today. As you will see, this is not the first meeting of the two Southports. Southport, England, and Southport, North Carolina have had a long and special relationship that goes back for decades. So one of the reasons we were pleased to do the presentation for you is because exactly 70 years ago in November of 1950, one of the citizens of your town, a councilwoman by the name of Mrs. Mae Bamber, came to visit Southport, North Carolina. And today's presentation gives us the opportunity to let you know how much her visit meant to our town. It seems that Mrs. Bamber had a sister who had relocated to the United States in the 1930s. A few years after the war, she decided to visit her sister. Now, in those years, international travel was a very big deal. Countries were still recovering from the impacts of the war. Commercial airline travel was just coming into its own. So we actually don't know whether Mrs. Bamber flew to the United States or traveled by ship. We do know that at least some of her travel within the US was by plane. So during her visit, Mrs. Bamber saw an advertisement for Southport, North Carolina. She decided to reach out to the town. One thing led to another, and she developed a correspondence with a Southport, North Carolina man named Bill Keziah. And he encouraged her to come for a visit the next time she visited the States. Keziah was known throughout North Carolina as a one-man chamber of commerce for Southport. He was a reporter who had founded our local newspaper before selling it to another publisher in the 1930s. And after selling the paper, he continued to work as a reporter. Keziah never tired of telling people about the virtues of Southport. He had visions of it becoming a much larger port town. He even named the newspaper the State Port Pilot because he wanted Southport to become the official port of the state. Keziah was a keen letter writer. He wrote anyone and everyone who he thought might help promote the town, and he counted several governors as his pen pals. It was often said that Keziah was always broke because he spent all of his salary on stationery and postage stamps. So this is a picture of the waterfront in the 1950s, and it gives an idea of what Southport would have looked like when Mrs. Bamber first visited. And you can see that this road, even though it's a wide road, is made of dirt. Later, they improved some of the roads, the main road that went perpendicular to this road, by using oyster shells. So Bill Keziah and Mae Bamber were obviously kindred spirits. They were both proud of their towns and willing to go the extra mile to support and promote them. Or, as in Mrs. Bamber's case, willing to go the extra 700 miles. She and her sister traveled to North Carolina from Tarrytown, that's New York, where her sister lived. They visited the governor's mansion in Raleigh and then headed to the coastal town of Southport, population 2,000 people. She brought official greetings from the mayor of Southport, England, to the mayor of Southport, North Carolina. Mayor Livingston and his wife opened their home to Mrs. Bamber and invited her to stay with them during her visit. And this is a picture of their home. Apparently the visit was a success because 8 years later, Mrs. Bamber returned. And this time she herself was the mayor of Southport. This visit was planned through the British Travel Association, and she toured 3 towns in the United States, all named Southport, in Connecticut, Maine, and finally North Carolina. Along the way, she made stops in other cities in Connecticut and North Carolina, including the state capitals, and she visited New York City and Washington, D.C. She made a great impression on everyone. She gave speeches at schools and community meetings. She had an outgoing personality that people liked. The newspapers across the states wrote a lot about the lady mayor, who preferred to be called by her official title, Mr. Mayor. She also stood out because she wore tri-cornered hats. When she became mayor of Southport, she had scoured the ordinances to find out if there were any rules regarding the color of the hats, or whether it was just tradition that they were always black. She discovered that there weren't any rules about the color, so she had them made in a lot of different shades to match her outfits. When she visited the US, she brought 6 hats with her in shades of cherry red, honey gold, peacock blue, green, navy, and black. So when I was preparing this presentation, I was telling my father the story of Mrs. Bamber and her hats. And he then told me a story about a time when his mother, my grandmother, had the opportunity to meet the First Lady, Eleanor Roosevelt. My grandmother asked Mrs. Roosevelt how she managed to travel with so many hats. And Mrs. Roosevelt responded, "One hat, many flowers." So I thought it was interesting that in the middle of the last century, women had to give so much thought and planning to their hats. And unlike Mrs. Roosevelt, Mrs. Bamber actually did travel with a multitude of hats. And generously, she chose to donate one to the Southport Historical Society, which we have taken good care of and still have more than 60 years later. And here it is. So hopefully you could all see that. Now, when Mayor Bamber came to our town, she attended an alderman meeting. The council let her preside over the meeting and give final approval to the building of our first police station. It was a combination police station and information center with room for our police chief and 1 deputy, sort of like Mayberry, if you've ever seen that TV show. Because at the time we had very little crime. Nowadays, we have grown to have a police chief and 8 deputies, and we still have very little crime. We didn't have a city jail, but we were the county seat, so we had the county jail. And this jail is shown right here. It's been closed since the 1970s, but since that time, the Historical Society has turned it into a very popular museum. So if any of you come to visit Southport, we would be happy to give you a personal tour of our old jail. So even though only 8 years had passed between Mayor Bamber's first and second visit to Southport, a lot had happened in between. In 1954, midway between her 2 trips, a Category 4 hurricane hit Southport. It was the only Cat 4 hurricane to hit North Carolina in the 20th century. It caused terrible damage to the town. It destroyed buildings. It dumped boats several blocks away from the river. And out along the beach, the devastation was even worse. There had been over 300 houses on the beach when Hurricane Hazel hit. 90 minutes later, when the storm moved on, only 5 houses were still standing. And in this picture, this is the same stretch of land on the left and on the right. And on the left, you can see the houses sitting on the road. On the right, where that X is, that's where the road was going to curve up to go up the beach. So that's the same spot. And you can see almost all the houses are all gone. 19 people in North Carolina were killed by Hurricane Hazel, but fortunately, none of them were in Southport. Sadly, though, newspaperman Bill Keziah had passed away in the years since Mayor Bamber's first visit. He died in 1957 at the age of 71. He had been a driving force in the positive relationship between the 2 towns, and he had been her friend. Keziah was all the more special because he had been completely deaf since childhood. He was able to communicate by using basic sign language and by writing back and forth on little tablets which he carried with him. Writing articles for the newspaper and his correspondence with numerous pen pals enabled him to express his thoughts and ideas. During her visit, Mayor Bamber spoke warmly about her friendship with Mr. Keziah. She also made a cash donation to be used for a memorial in his honor. If you come and visit Southport, we'll be happy to show you Keziah Park, a sweet little spot a block over from the water and very close to the town library. So that was not the end of Mrs. Bamber's visits to our town. She and her husband continued to make several more visits over the next 20 years. During her visits, she often spoke at community meetings and brought with her generous gifts from England. So you can see her standing next to that large wooden container, and that contains 100 books which the people of Southport, England donated to our library. It's no wonder that our town gave her the title of England's Ambassador of Goodwill. In 1977, several ladies, including her friend, former Mayor Livingston's wife, traveled from Southport, North Carolina to Southport, England, which must have been a big adventure for them. And now, Bob has some more details of the trip and some mementos to share with you. So we need to take Bob off mute.
Thank you, Liz. What I'm going to be showing you the next few slides are actually from scrapbooks that Mae Bamber kept about her visits to Southport. Right now, those scrapbooks are at the University of North Carolina with doing some restoration work as well as digitizing the contents of the books. Or I would have more than the few slides that I have now to show you. So this photograph is of Mae Bamber at the Southport, North Carolina Aldermen's meeting. And you kind of have to presume the man to her left is Mr. Livingston, who was the mayor at the time. And that was in, of course, he's pretty sure that that's what the picture is saying because he was the mayor in 1949 to 1951. And of course, her visit would have been 1950. And we presume that she is showing Mayor Mayor Livingston the greetings from Southport's England's mayor at that time. Next, Liz. This is as you can see, a newspaper article, but it's following up the gifts of the books to our library. This was actually a second gift of books that was done some years later. I believe in the mid 1960s. The people in the photograph, Reverend D.B. Garland, Mayor P.R. Switzer, and Mrs. Mae Bamber. Next slide. Over the years, that first exchange of greetings in 1950 were followed up by different gifts and occasions through the next couple decades. In 1953, Southport, North Carolina sent to your town a park bench, or donated a park bench, which I believe should be was displayed on your Lord Street. We also have a Lord Street, so as often we try to draw comparisons between the two cities with the two Lord Streets. The 1956 flower show badge was a gift by Mrs. Livingston to the to the Southport Welfare Services. So folks that might not have had an opportunity to go to the flower show, so the badge was their entrance into the flower show. In 1958, on another visit, Mrs. Bamber here, our board of aldermen presented her with a portrait of our city hall. At that time, our city hall was actually an old school building, but it was in the midst of it, and still the building is still there, in the midst of a very beautiful little park called Franklin Square Park. And if you can see the azaleas blooming in the spring, it's quite a great scene. also wonder if that portrait was done by a man by the name of Art Newton, who I will be talking about later. In 1959 was the original 100 books, and then there were several others that were brought over in 1965. And then in 1977, Mrs. Livingston, who was our postmaster at the time, and widow of our former mayor, traveled with two friends to visit you, and she presented to Mrs. Peggy Beeston, received a pewter medallion commemorating, it was called a Patriots Medallion, and it commemorating the 200th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence in 1776, I'm sorry. Next, Liz. This is the comparison of Lord Streets. Ours is not quite as well traveled as yours, I'm assuming, but both beautiful in their own way. Next. All right. The photo on the left, presuming was taken in your town, as Mae Bamber has her tri-cornered hat on, but she's looking over what looks to be an advertisement, a full-page advertisement by the town of Southport, encouraging people to come and visit and spend their vacation time in Southport, North Carolina. Some of the highlights of the advertisement were, we had 3 modern motels that you could stay at. There were 3 restaurants. And also in town were 2 photographers. So presumably you could stay at one of the motels, have dinner in one of the restaurants with photos taken by one of our two photographers. And then the convincer was that the activities that we had to offer were skiing or swimming, skiing, and resting. A very North Carolina vacation of the time. And Mrs. Bamber is wearing, and that's the photo of the tricolor cornered hat that Liz modeled for you all. Next one. This is a display at our old jail museum, which was mentioned earlier. I don't have at this point a real record of when the jacket and the 2 hats that I would associate with English police were provided, but they are displayed proudly, as you can see. And it's interesting, they're displayed in what we call the patch room. And you can see that behind the jacket, different patches. And when people come to visit this museum, they will often go into the patch room and they will see a wall full of patches from a variety of first responder organizations across across the eastern United States anyway. And there's also a section where we have several patches from international organizations. And this is a patch like this, which is from the Knox County, Tennessee Sheriff's Office. And it really is interesting to watch the younger population come in and they're really taken by all of the colors and the different locations. And the first thing they want to know is their town identified, or does your town send patches? So we keep on getting a steady flow of new patches to put on in the room. But I would note there's not one from your community yet. Definitely needed.
I'm not sure that we have such a thing, but I will look into it for you.
Okay, thank you very much.
That's okay.
Next, Liz. Okay, as we mentioned before, 3 ladies from Southport, North Carolina in 1977 visited Southport, England. And in the photograph on the left is Mrs. Mae Bamber. Next, left to right, is Mrs. Vivian Jones. This is Marjorie Livingston. And again, Marjorie Livingston was the widow of Mayor Livingston, who met Mae Bamber in 1950. And she was also the postmaster of Southport at the time that this photograph was taken. And to her right is Mrs. Vera McKeithen. So the 3 ladies were good friends, and they came to visit for a 3-week period of time. Next. First, they made a visit to London, and having been a tourist in London myself, they did exactly, I think, what tourists do in London. They made their way to Buckingham Palace, Westminster Abbey, Tower Bridge. By the scrapbook and what's in the scrapbook, as you can imagine, that these 3 ladies must have been touring or sightseeing about 25 hours a day. Of course, then they even carved out time to go to 2 performances in the theater district, and then plus they made a day trip to Stratford-upon-the-Avon. So they, I think, had a very full and exciting trip and visit to London. Next slide, please. Then, as it's titled in the scrapbook, as Mrs. Livingston titled it, they made and really started their really big day when they arrived in Southport. I was going to say, Liz had mentioned to me the Southport Mercy side, and that got me to thinking about songs. Is the ferry still running? It is? Okay.
It is, but we do have a tunnel now going under the river, which is much more popular.
And then I actually had forgotten the name of the I was thinking Beatles, and it's Jerry and the Pacemakers, and I was a little bit taken by Pacemakers as the band's name. Southport, England, you know, it's a variety of activities, and they toured and did bus trips many days. They even visited Wales at the time. The next slide, you can see they also visited and went to the theater in Southport, as well as they made a visit to Lord Street on one Sunday when they went to church on Lord Street. Next, Liz. Okay. What was really important was the official visit to meet the mayor of Southport. And this is really the first time that Southport, North Carolina had kind of returned the official visit, as Mrs. Livingston was our postmaster. So she was an official of the United States government at the time. So the photograph is her signing the register at the town hall and the exchange of gifts with your mayor, Peggy Beeston. Mayor Beeston gave, I think I mentioned this before, Postmaster Livingston a print of a painting of Lord Street, and Postmaster Livingston presented Mayor Beeston with the pewter Patriot medallion that I had mentioned. On the photo on the right, Mrs. Livingston was also honored to be a judge in the Rosebud contest, which was won by, and I wonder if they're here today, was won by 6-year-old Susan Doss and 6-year-old Donna Graham, the two young ladies in the front of the photograph. But that was quite a thrill and a happy time for Mrs. Livingston. The next slide has just some of the souvenirs that over the years have made their way to our historical society, including the medallion of the 200th anniversary of Southport, a history of Southport, and that was signed by Norman K. Jones, who was your mayor at the time, and then the prints of different scenes in Southport's history. This is now an annual display that we put up in our Fort Johnston Museum. So you can see we're still excited about the exchanges between our two communities. Liz, I think it's back to you with the next slide.
Back to me, okay. Well, since we are the Historical Society, we wanted to give you a little overview of the history of our town. In doing research, I was surprised to learn that both Southport, North Carolina and Southport, England were founded in the same year, 1792, which I think is an amazing coincidence. Although at the time, Southport, North Carolina wasn't named Southport, we were called Smithville. And I think in a few minutes, Bob is going to explain how and when our name changed. But both towns were established in 1792, and they were started for similar reasons. So in England, from what I was able to find out, an innkeeper named Charles Sutton built a bathing house at the end of what is now Lord Street in order to entice people to come for their health. And in the same way, in the US, a man named Joshua Potts fell in love with our location on the edge of the Cape Fear. He especially liked what he called salubrious breezes, or health-giving breezes that came in off the water. So both towns began as places people like to travel to for the sake of their health and to enjoy the natural beauty. So this map is a map of the original 100 lots of our town. It's a little bit bigger now, but not a whole lot. So Southport is located on the edge of the Cape Fear River as it opens into the Atlantic Ocean. So this map on the left, I put a star where Smithville, Southport was, and then these are a couple barrier islands that you'll see, but that's the Cape Fear River, and it opens out into the Atlantic. Now, about 50 years before the town was established, there was a fort here. The fort was built to protect that waterway. And this fort was named Fort Johnston. Bob just mentioned that. And it was actually built by the British before the American Revolution, when North Carolina was still a part of a British colony. And this was the earliest picture I could find of the fort. This is still probably early 1900s, but it's more similar to the way that it looked previously, historically. So during the Revolution, the British colonial government was located a few miles upriver from Southport. So you can see that in Newbern, that's where the British colonial government was. But at one point during the war, the governor's mansion was attacked And he decided for his own safety that he would move the government down to the fort. But unfortunately for him, the townspeople living around the fort, there weren't that many, but they were a rough and tumble group. They didn't particularly like him being there. So they chased him out of the fort, and they chased him back out to his ship that was anchored in the river, and made him move out there. He sailed away, and they set fire to the fort. After the war, the US government slowly rebuilt the fort, and it was just about ready for use at the start of the next war with Great Britain, which we call the War of 1812, and which I'm not even sure you call it anything. But during the 2 to 3 years of the war, there were British blockades all along the eastern seaboard, and that's those little dashed lines you see along the coast. You'll notice that there aren't any around North Carolina. Where that blue star is, that's where Southport is, and you can see pretty much there's nothing blocking North Carolina, because the British didn't really think there were big enough towns there that they really needed to bother blocking them. So anyway, that was the War of 1812, and then that was the last time that we fought a war with Great Britain. But it's impossible to discuss the history of Southport and of North Carolina and our relationship with Great Britain without mentioning the Civil War. This time, it was the northern states that instituted a blockade around the southern ports, and they did include Southport. Southern mariners got around those blockades in specially designed ships called blockade runners. Many of these blockade runners were built in England and were designed for speed and maneuverability. So there's an image of one of the ships specially built in England. So Confederates used the ships to evade the Union blockade. They usually would slip out on dark nights. If they were seen and pursued, they were often able to outrun their pursuers because of the design of the ships. If they were unlucky enough to evade the blockade, they headed straight for the Caribbean with their cargoes of cotton to trade. So they couldn't trade directly with England because of an agreement with the United States. So the United States had asked Britain not to trade with the Confederates. So what would happen is the Confederates would bring their ships to the Bahamas, Bermuda, and then neutral ships brought guns and other goods from England to the Caribbean, and they would meet up there in the middle. Trading would take place there, and then the one set of ships would go back to the UK, and the other set of ships would go back to the Confederate ports, where they would try once more to slip past the blockades. So there were blockades all along the southern coast in big towns like Charleston and New Orleans. But one by one, these Confederate ports fell to the Union. The Cape Fear River, which led to the port of Wilmington, was the last holdout in the Civil War. Now you'll see there's Smithville, which is Southport right there on the water, and then right across from it, just about, is a fort called Fort Fisher that was protecting the Cape Fear along with a couple other smaller forts. When Fort Fisher fell in January of 1865, the town of Southport surrendered. The United States Navy was then able to sail up the river and capture Wilmington. 3 months later, the entire Confederacy surrendered. The war ended, and the United States was a single country once again. And so now Bob's going to bring you up to date on the history of our town since then.
Hey, thank you, Liz. The paintings in this collage, I had mentioned the man before, were created in the 1950s and early 1960s by a local artist by the name of Art Newton. Newton was a native of Southport, and in his paintings, he painted what he saw and what he knew about Southport. Today, his paintings really challenge us to explore the history of Southport through his work. And let me do that by sharing with you a few more bits of our history through this collage. The painting in the upper left-hand corner depicts 2 generations of towers used by Southport river pilots. In the mid-1700s, river pilots chose to come to Southport, and chose that Southport location because it gave them quick access to ships that needed to cross the bar to enter into the Cape Fear River and then make their way 28 miles up to the port of Wilmington. In colonial days, the major export of our region was naval stores, tar, pitch, and turpentine. And before the Revolution, more than 70% of naval stores used by the British Navy came from the pine forests in the Cape Fear River Basin. That exchange is really a perfect example of what I think it was about in grade school at some later year that we learned that as to being the mercantile system. Certainly was well practiced here in Eastern North Carolina. To the right of the towers is a painting of the Bald Head Lighthouse. It was located on an island off the coast of Southport. The light was built in 1804 and is now a major tourist attraction for visitors and residents of the Bald Head community. The Bald Head community can only be reached by ferry and is the home of 200 or so permanent residents, a number that swells during the warmer months. The light was necessary because of a 28-mile-long sand shoal going out into the Atlantic. Interesting, you might be interested that the climate on Bald Head Island, the island is located just about 5 miles closer to the Gulf Stream than is the mainland. The climate on Bald Head is categorized as semi-tropical, and the flora that you will find on Bald Head Island. Bald Head's the only place in North Carolina that flora can be found because of the differing climate. The riverfront home in the bottom right-hand corner was built by a river pilot by the name of Thomas Mann Thompson. And let me just mention that blockade running was a business, and if you were successful in running the blockade, you were very successful in business. And those boats, many of those boats, and I think Liz mentioned this, were owned by British entrepreneurs, and even some of the captains were British. One of the positions that was extremely important to success was having a good pilot. And local pilots, the fact that they had grown up and been in these waters their entire lifetimes, were the best pilots. A pilot could make, on a successful run through the blockade, the pilot could earn $3,000 to $5,000. Now, that is not Confederate script. Those are British pounds or gold or silver. So Thomas Mann Thompson guided ships through the blockade some 79 times. And he watched his money very carefully. And then after the Civil War, he built this home, which still stands today. And it's a beautiful, beautiful home. The point I would want to make, why were they so successful running the blockade in Southport? And really the answer is geography. There were two, at the time of the American Civil War, there were two inlets, one right coming in from the Atlantic Ocean, one right across from Southport, and another about 7 miles upriver. So there were two inlets that blockade runners had their choice of coming into. Also, that 28-mile sand shoal meant that the Union blockaders had to have twice as many ships because it was a 60-mile round trip to go from one inlet to another because the Confederacy controlled the river. Right? After the war, the second inlet was closed. And since that was upriver, the closing of that inlet caused the river channel to deepen. And because of that change, the harbor of Southport became again a deep water harbor, about 7 miles long and approximately 3 miles wide. In reality, it was the largest harbor between the Panama Canal and Norfolk, Virginia. And that was a great business advantage that the town of Southport had. Entrepreneurs saw that advantage, and they recognized that the one thing that they didn't have that they needed was a rail line coming in to Southport. And there were, I just looked at it the other day, there were about 30 different propositions or schemes to bring a railroad to Southport. As part of those propositions and part of presenting the town for that investment, the alderman came to the conclusion that having a town by the name of Smithville was just not the image that they wanted to provide. So they came up with the name of Southport to indicate that that our location, we would be the major port of the South. It never happened. The railroad came, but it came much too late, and it was too little, too late. It didn't come until 1911. Part of the proposition was that it would be a coaling station, but by the time 1911, the mid 1911 came around, steamers were changing their fuel from coal to oil. So Southport, Smithville, even though it changed its name to Southport, never became the major port of the South. Just a note, the first name, Smithville, came from Revolutionary War general from the local community, and also later a governor of North Carolina by the name of Benjamin Smith. And while the aldermen were at it, changing the name of the town, they decided that Pot Street, which was one of the major residential streets in the town, that Pot Street, this wasn't a good name either. It wasn't drawing investors. So they changed Pot Street to Atlantic Avenue. Of the two changes, that's probably the one that became the most problematic over the years, because Pot Street was named after Joshua Potts, who was the founder of the town. So many folks did not really approve of that change, and I suspect you can find a few even today that would like to see Joshua Potts properly honored. The paintings on the bottom left-hand corner is of a shrimp house and a shrimp boat. In the 1920s, a change came to the people of Southport. Prior to the 1920s, people in our community thought that shrimp, or saw shrimp as bait. And because it was bait, it was not something that you eat. Then in the 1920s, they discovered that those Yankee fools up in Philadelphia and New York, they would eat all of the shrimp / bait that Southport could send to them. So from the 1920s to its peak in 1945, millions of pounds of shrimp were sent to from Southport to the foolish Yankees up north. I happen to be a foolish Yankee, so I can say that. At one time, there were 75 shrimp trawlers coming out of Southport Harbor. Today, there is exactly one left. The other fishing business that the town had, and was essentially the history of Southport, was that of a fishing village. And we might like to think of it as a quaint fishing village. But the other industry was menhaden fishing. Menhaden is a relatively small, oily fish, and that you can make a variety of products, including cosmetics, by extracting the oil from the menhaden. The locals called menhaden pogie. And so you extracted the oil, and then that process was done when that process was done, the air in Southport smelled. The odor was horrific. I had a lady described to me at one time as when a baby's diapers needed to be changed. The saying was that the baby was pogie. And I repeated that to another group and had another lady in the back of the room say, "Oh, honey, you have no idea." So, but the people of Southport called that odor the smell of Southport money. Because at a time in the late 1800s, when there were maybe 1,200 people in town, 150 of those people, or 200 to 200, were employed by the menhaden fishing industry. The painting to the right is of a pilot's boat and an oil tanker behind the pilot's boat. It's kind of indicative that would have been the traffic on our harbor in the 1950s and in 1960s. So we have gained from that time. In 1955, the military ocean terminal at Sunny Point was established, and it's through this terminal that some 80 to 90% of the armaments used by the U.S. military across the world come through that terminal. So that was a great boost for the economy, just in the number of jobs that were, well-paying longshoreman jobs that were provided. And since that time, a nuclear power plant has come to the community, as well as other light industrial activities. Let me note that this next to the what we call Matsu, the military ocean terminal at Sunny Point, next to Matsu, its neighbor is the nuclear power plant. I've heard the commander of Matsu, because it's a military installation, the commander of Matsu make it clear to everyone that when he's giving a presentation and he is talking to the audience, that he was not the fool that placed a nuclear power plant next to a military armaments terminal. But things have gone well so far. The two paintings in the upper right hand corner really are demonstrations of the natural beauty of Southport. The one on the right, Liz showed you the photograph of what that street looked like. That was the dirt road street, and this would have been one of the docks for a house on that area. And there is a image of a man at the end of the pier, which Art Newton's daughter believes is an image of her mother, as painted by her father. So that's the history of Southport through the eyes of Art Newton. Liz?
Okay, when I was researching this program, I couldn't help but wonder what Mae Bamber would have thought of Zoom and this whole computer technology. And then I came across this picture of Mae with the Southport Garden Club in England. And when you look at what they're doing, she's got a big tape recorder. I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember from the 60s and things. That's what the tape recorders look like, with the reel-to-reel tape. And she's got a microphone. It was probably very modern at the time. And what they were doing is they were recording messages on a tape recorder to send across the ocean to the Garden Club in Southport, North Carolina. And so it occurred to me that Mae was always looking ahead and embracing new ideas and new technology to better communicate with the world and to let the world know about Southport, England. So I think if Mae were here today, she'd be first in line to learn Zoom and to make new friends across the globe. So that's the end of our presentation. We appreciate very much you letting us join you today and to extend our friendship across the pond. And we hope that you enjoyed learning more about Southport, North Carolina. And I'm going to stop sharing the screen so I can see your faces. There we go.
That was absolutely fabulous. Thank you.
Oh, good. Do you guys have any questions? Anything?
Anybody?
Are you anticipating coming for a visit now?
Are you going to come here?
I just thought it was absolutely fabulous. From somebody who was born in Southport, England, I just loved it. And I think that the thing that really struck me was the shrimping and that original kind of, fishing village stuff that I understand from my background is so similar to yours. And I just thought it was fabulous. Well done. I mean, it so engaged me. Fabulous.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Anybody else? Were you all aware that going back and forth between Southport, England and Southport, North Carolina?
No.
Absolutely not. No.
So striking. And at that time, when it was really such a big deal to travel back and forth like that they did it. And I'm so impressed with them for having done that and thought up all those great ways to connect the communities.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And I really admire Mae Bamber. She was, when I started looking, I was looking at newspapers.com. And I started finding article after article, and I found an article in the New York Times and, Washington, D.C., and then the state capitals. She knew how to get press. It just impressed me. Even the fact that, she told people she preferred to be called Mr. Mayor. People, that lady there from England, and she liked to be called Mr. Mayor. That got all written up. And of course, her hats, and I don't know how well you guys could see the hat, but it's just wonderful.
Yeah.
And
brilliant.
so clever to travel with them in all different colors and, and wearing the hat.
I wanted to mention, I think that Southport, North Carolina would have returned the visit earlier if it was up to Marjorie Livingston. And I've been told the reason that it took that amount of time, she would have done it almost immediately. However, her husband, who was the mayor, would not fly.
Okay. Ooh.
And then he passed away. She was the postmaster, so it all fit and made sense at that time. And I also think, like, for example, she gave a gift to the so that people could go to the flower show, I believe it was. I'm sure that she and Mae Bamber, came to that conclusion that would be an appropriate gift. But I think it does demonstrate Marjorie Livingston's desire to keep a friendship going. And Mrs. Bamber, I believe I'm correct, I think maybe every time she came, she stayed with the Livingstons.
Yeah, she did.
I mean, it sounds like they really did connect.
They did. They really became friends.
I wonder if there's any information. I wonder if there's any information about this in Southport Town Hall. Has anybody done the tour of Southport Town Hall? Have they got any artifacts regarding this exchange?
It's news to me.
It might have been a bigger deal for us than it was for, we were a very small town. Maybe it was a bigger deal for us than it was. I don't know.
Maybe.
Are you still in touch?
I don't.
Are you still in touch with Southport, England? No.
Just
this is the first that I know of.
Starting a new tradition.
Yes.
How lovely.
Should be a twin town.
Yeah.
I also don't know. We have Mae Bamber 2 scrapbooks. I don't know how we got those 2 scrapbooks, and we also have the scrapbook of Marjorie Livingston, as well as all of these souvenirs, all these other articles. I think Mrs. Livingston, again, had to be her leadership and making sure that they got to the Historical Society. I do believe that she was a founding member of the society, which our society was only established in 1976.
I've got an old zigzag book, photographs. It must be in the late 20s, which was my father's of Southport, and it's on a shelf upstairs on a bookshelf. And I keep looking at it. I'm wondering what to do with it. I'm going to send it to you.
Ooh, there you go.
Yes.
Oh, that's wonderful.
It's got about 10 little tiny photographs in of Southport in the 20s.
Oh.
Perhaps we could make a photo book. That would be good, to send you some pictures of Southport as it is now.
Yeah.
I love your strap line, the home of salubrious breezes.
That's right.
And I also read that your local council has a committee called the Beautification Committee.
I love it.
Thought, how fantastic is that?
Yeah.
And we
also,
nominate one.
well, and also that you're often used as location for film making.
Yes. Yeah, we didn't even get a chance to tell you that, but if you've ever seen, trying to think, Safe Haven, I Know What You Did Last Summer. We have a whole room in our visitor center. We have a whole room dedicated to the movies that were filmed, Hilbert. There were a bunch of movies filmed here. Yeah.
Actually, if you want to see Southport, the movie Safe Haven.
Safe Haven really showcased.
Entirely done in Southport, North Carolina.
Okay.
Catherine, you're on mute. Catherine, you're on mute. Emma, I think you can ask her.
Yeah, I've got it. Yeah. I would think when you said about questions, I thought maybe I'm wrong. Was the film Cape Fear filmed anywhere near you?
I don't think so.
No, it wasn't.
There was a film called Cape Fear.
Yeah.
Made me think. Yeah, when you said about the river. Yeah.
I know.
Oh, well,
and I saw that movie a long time ago. I thought, I'll never live on the Cape Fear.
Your population is still very small. I think is it about 4,000, but it looks like it's increased significantly in the last couple of years. So why are people coming to live in Southport?
There's a large retirement communities around it. It's
similar to us.
Same. Yeah.
There's a little over 3,000 in Southport proper, maybe 3,500, and then there's some communities around it. So maybe about 18,000 in the larger area. Would you say that's right? It's about 18,000 people. I think it's green.
I think I'd like to retire in Southport, North Carolina, though, rather than Southport, Merseyside, simply because your weather looks so much nicer than ours.
Definitely a better climate.
Just those occasional hurricanes.
Absolutely.
Oh,
oh well, never mind.
Can't have everything.
Have everything.
Well, I'm volunteering to organise a trip if anybody's interested.
I'll go to see.
I thought of you as soon as this was going. I thought Nancy's the girl.
You couldn't cope with all you.
You can see a picture of the alligator that I included, right? We do have alligators.
Well, we don't see them very often.
Liz, I was about to say that you've become the new Bill Keziah of
Yes.
South.
Yes, I'll take Bill Keziah to talk up Southport. I think it's wonderful. I hope you do. You know, it would be great if you guys came for a visit, and we would be happy to show you all around.
Well, looks a lovely place.
Our three motels are still open.
And
your restaurants.
There's really nice bed and breakfasts too.
Would you fly to New York and then get?
No.
Yeah, probably you could fly to New York and then you'd catch a flight to Wilmington, right? You couldn't fly directly to.
It's going to be to Charlotte. You're going to fly.
Oh, you think Charlotte?
Yeah.
I've got 6 cousins in New York.
There
you go. Just a little trip down.
My aunt but I've got 6 cousins.
You can fly direct from New York to Wilmington, so you could get there, or Myrtle Beach.
Well, I go to New Jersey every year.
What's that?
Is that near?
Not really. Like a 10-hour drive. But no. So I've got family in New Jersey and I've got friends in Raleigh, North Carolina. So.
Oh, well, Raleigh's only 3 hours away, right, Bob? 3?
Yeah.
10 hours. Raleigh, 3 hours?
3 hours, yep.
Drive, yeah.
Oh, I can definitely feel a trip coming on. Yeah.
We are currently having all of the scrapbooks digitized. So we'd be glad. Well, we can be glad to give you the links. They'll be on our website.
Yeah.
It's not to be tomorrow that this is going to happen. We would want to do that.
Interesting.
Do you have a Facebook page for the Historical Society or for the town?
Both,
both actually.
But the Historical Society, I think if you just search for Southport Historical Society, Southport NC Historical Society.
Right.
We
follow you.
We get a number of visitors like yourselves who come and see us very, very briefly because they thought they were going to Southport, England, and they end up in.
Yeah. On Google weather, we often get your predicted your weather if we're not careful to put Southport, England.
Well, it probably sounds pretty good most of the time, right?
I'm on a few 30 degrees it keeps coming up with, and you think, oh, lovely tomorrow. No.
I'm on a few of the Southport buy, swap and sell groups and things, for the local area. And every so often somebody posts something and somebody has to write, this is Southport, UK. You might want to check your site because this is available 4,000 miles from you.
And as Mae Bamber found, there's several Southports in the U.S. So Connecticut. There was also one in Florida that she never visited. I don't know why. And then for some reason, there's one in Indiana. I have no idea why, but they definitely didn't visit that one. So.
None of our members related to Mae Bamber or know of her. It's a very common name in Southport, isn't it?
Yeah, I did wonder. It's not on my side. It's on my uncle's side of the family. His mum was Bamber, so it's made me think maybe there's a little bit of digging need to be done.
Yeah.
She lived in Scareswick Street, so an indigenous Southport family. So it's possible. Yeah.
There's the dance school, Loretta Bamber, isn't there?
Yes. Yes.
Oh, yes.
Bamber. Yeah.
Bamber.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
Guys, I've found the Facebook link and I've put it on our
Facebook page. Yeah.
Oh, thanks, Elaine.
Yeah.
Good. Well, we'll be putting this recording up on our Facebook page as soon as we have it. So you'll be able to share it with your friends who didn't come.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay.
Yeah, it's amazing. Really good. Thank you.
Lovely to,
yes, thank you.
All right. Well, thank you. We'll let you get on with the rest of your meeting, but thank you.
No, thank you. That was really, really good.
Thanks.
Bye.
And then if you can just send me the recording when it's done, we'll trim off the ends. Don't worry.
Okay. All right.